second question for Ricardo. Ricardo, RGA is a full-service agency with thousands of employees around the world. Could you tell us how you collaborate with other specialists, such as user interface designers and product designers?
Yeah, absolutely. So to tell you a little bit more about RGA, for those that may not know, we're again, big agency all around the world, really. Can't remember exactly the amount of offices, but yeah, thousands of people spread out. But basically, one of the big things that we believe in is stories and systems. And right there at the center is where RGA tends to, or at least would like to think that we thrive in. And one great example is stories and systems. It's Nike, right? So when you think of stories, you think of the tagline, just do it, right? And I think the next slide also has a bit of that example. But what does that mean, right? If it's just do it, for us, the system is what are the tools to help implement that message. So is it apparel? Is it the apps? Is it the campaign works that we're putting out? Could it be a website? Could it be a landing page? They've also done like the whole Nike Fuel band. Again, the list goes on and on, but the idea is that if a client has a message, or even if they don't, how can we help them craft the message, craft the story, and then give them the right tools to help them implement that. So that's RGA in a nutshell. And I think for us, what I've seen is that as a UX designer, we collaborate with multiple people. And I think a little bit earlier, I was mentioning some of these titles, processes. And one of the ones that I've mentioned is the whole discover, define, and design. And usually we follow up with developing the actual software if we need to develop it. And then once it's taken in-house, it would be iterating on that project. So similar to what Emily was talking about, where you're gathering data, you're learning about the user as much as possible, and then implementing on that. So for me, the way that I've work with different designers, it really depends on the role. I think if it's a UX researcher, let's see, I was at a project maybe a couple of months ago, and really we were crafting this new piece of software essentially. And I brought in this other UX researcher and UX strategist, and the question there was, okay, we don't have time to go into a full-on discovery section. What can we do? And her role was, hey, you know what? Let's brainstorm. Let's talk it through. What are the goals? What exactly are you trying to do? And then from then on, she was like, hey, you know what? I've had a couple of things that I've built in the past. There, I think she had 12 different best practices that worked perfectly for the project that we were working on. So, so that was one way where, again, just communicating back and forth. And we're having a conversation with Esther and Emily a while back where Esther mentioned workshops. And I love the idea of workshops because that's something that, again, in UX, we do a bunch. Whether it's working with, again, the client or different designers, we'll jump up. If we have a board, we'll start sketching things together and almost like write it out, draw it out, and say, hey, is this what you mean? Do you think this would work? So that's something that we do quite often. Whenever I work with other UX designers, usually discussing wireframes. Again, once we have the right insights from the strategist or from the researchers, we might start just wireframing and collaborating with those wireframes. I've had times in the past where I'll similar to what we're saying here. Well, I'll have an idea that I think it's gold. This is the way to solve that problem. That chat box is going to look this way and it's going to function this way. But another UX designer or designer in general, right? Like this has happened also with people who are visual designers. They all have great ideas. And for me, one of the key things is, again, remain humble and listen, right? I think Emily was talking a little bit about that. How can I learn every day? How can I learn, pick up from people? So again, those are other ways for me to collaborate. But also other ways that we've collaborated quite a ton is sharing resources. If we're working on a specific set of guidelines, someone like a UI designer might have a full set of design systems that the client's using that I'm not aware of. So as soon as they pop that up, I might be able to use those within my work. And when it comes down to and here in the graph that I have is develop. If I'm working with a developer, whether someone super technical or someone that's more of a UI engineer, UI engineer might be someone that's again a designer by nature, but it's also technical. So with them, I might show them things that I've seen online, and I might pull that up and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Can this be implemented? Or I'll ask them questions about their stack. If it's something that I'm familiar with, I might have better alternatives or options in terms of kind of what I'm thinking. One of those questions too, if I'm working with someone technical, is like if I see that they're using a very old stack, then I'll avoid like fancy interactions, fancy animations, and we'll just go with what works. And again, with product designers, whether someone on the client end or within our team, we don't really have like product designers at RGA, at least that I know of. But with a product designer at a client level, it might be once we've shipped out the designs, ensuring that they know what to look for. So again, we talked about, or I mentioned the whole design systems, making sure that they have the right resources or that we can provide them the right kind of stuff. So yeah, that's how I tend to collaborate with a lot of different designers. And again, as I was mentioning, there's different titles, but oftentimes they overlap a lot.
Great. We are getting a lot of very, very good questions. So I'm going to skip my original follow-up. I'm going to directly post the question to you. So you got to think on your feet. So I have a question that's from Lee Corey. This one, Christie, you can chime in as well. What software is the most commonly used for UI design?
Mm-hmm. No, it's a great question. So commonly used, I would say Sketch, XD, and Figma. Those are your bread and butter. But really, and it's funny because when we talked about how the career has developed, the profession has developed, these softwares were not around whatever 10 years ago. If anything, people used, I think, Photoshop, Illustrator, and I use InDesign too to create wireframes. Yeah. Anyway, so today, Sketch and Figma are definitely the two things to go to. In my opinion, I think at this point, Figma's got a bit of an upper hand. I think for me to do what I do on Figma now, before I was doing it through plugins, and I loved my Sketch workflow. I had my plugins. I just went in and did everything that I wanted super quick. But now Figma kind of does it natively, so that works really well. I know also InVision was another tool that I worked with a ton. Usually with Sketch and InVision, that was the two things that I use the most. But now really you can do a lot of this stuff in Figma. But again, if your company can't afford something like Adobe XD or if you're just trying to test things out, I will get a free trial. Also, Sketch is really cheap. Yeah, I mean, they're giving Adobe a run for their money.
So Christie, you want to add some of your
I support what Ricardo said, and I think those three programs are the most popular program. And I tell my students all the time, if you are familiar with one of the programs that we mentioned, it's so easy to pick up others and try to play with it. And so you never know what kind of software that the company will offer when you're applying. So I think get to know one of them first, and once you feel comfortable, try out other things, and I think that will give you more opportunity.